Good afternoon, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and here is a detailed forecast update for the rainfall situation that's expected to unfold across southeast Queensland as a result of the remnants of ex-tropical Cyclone Alfred moving inland this afternoon. All the details surrounding potential flooding and rainfall accumulations upcoming into today's forecast update. If you are brand new to the channel, please consider subscribing and also leave a like on the video while you're at it. The support lately has been much appreciated. But let's get stuck straight into things with ex-tropical Cyclone Alfred moving through the northern parts of the Moreton Bay area, about to make another landfall on Bribie Island. The remnants are actually still out to sea at this point here, but they're bouncing back towards the Queensland coastline at this time. It has taken a very erratic track, that's for sure, and a landfall again is expected between Caloundra and Caboolture in the next couple of hours. Again, it's not a tropical cyclone, but it will be crossing the coast once again. And the reason why it's not a tropical cyclone is because those wind speeds just don't hold up anymore. Now, if we didn't have weather observations at Moreton Island, I'd imagine that this would still be classified as a tropical cyclone, because the Moreton Bay Lighthouse here at 50 km/h winds, considering that it is in the eye wall, this tropical cyclone is obviously substantially weaker than what the imagery that we're seeing from the radar imagery and the satellite imagery would suggest. This tropical cyclone looks a lot stronger, or this tropical low rather, looks a lot stronger than just tropical low status, and that's probably why a lot of people in the Brisbane metro area have been saying that they really didn't feel too much in the way of impacts last night, which is very good news indeed. There's two reasons for that. This tropical cyclone headed into the Moreton Bay area substantially weaker than what we were expecting. It moved a lot quicker than what we were expecting as well, and it was also substantially further towards the north than what we were initially expecting. In fact, it ran up the Moreton Island sort of area up towards Bribie Island. So conditions around the Bribie Island area were actually pretty bumpy last night, but around the Brisbane metro area it was far enough away from the tropical cyclone as to where it wasn't a problem. And that's what we see in tropical cyclones. Wobbles in the track, even right up towards landfall. We can see wobbles in this track that bring the worst conditions away from certain locations and take the worst conditions towards certain locations. So your prayers in Brisbane last night were answered. It was certainly worth preparing for a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone impact, especially for Redland City and Redcliffe and those sort of areas along the coastline of Moreton Bay. Into the metro area, those conditions, very thankful that they didn't rise up towards Category 2 strength cyclonic. Still, though, some pretty strong wind gusts were reported here and there, and we certainly had those wind speeds maxing out at close to 100 km/h across the Brisbane city area. But for those further inland out towards Ipswich and Logan City and those sort of areas, the conditions were not as rough as what the forecast initially suggested. And even down on the Gold Coast, yes, it was very windy and very wet down there last night. It felt like a full-blown tropical cyclone. The conditions, however, the winds were not as strong as 155 km/h gusts that we were expecting. However, some private weather observations along Stradbroke Islands that have been shared or given the privilege to be shared with, we've had some really significant wind gusts come out of them, with gusts up to 145 km/h, which supported that Category 2 strength tropical cyclone landfall on North Stradbroke Island late last night. Anyways, the worst is still to come from ex-tropical Cyclone Alfred, and so we zoom out and take a look at the wider picture with the radar imagery. You can see on the southern and the southeastern side of the tropical cyclone this intense band of rainfall, with rainfall rates here up to about 70 millimeters an hour, and then well out to sea here this massive swathe of convection, which is now rounding out on the southern side of the tropical cyclone, moving in from the east, and is expected to collide with the Brisbane coastline in the next couple of hours. We're expecting some monster rainfall accumulations as a result of this. Remnant energy dragged in by tropical Cyclone Alfred, and as such some big time rainfall accumulations are expected. What do I mean by that? Well, let's jump into the forecast right now and see what's expected with tropical Cyclone Alfred's rainfall forecast. What we need to understand first is the expected track of the remnant energy of ex-tropical Cyclone Alfred. So like I said, moving up through Bribie Island and in towards Caboolture, which will directly impact the Maroochydore and the Mooloolaba area in the southern parts of the Sunshine Coast. We're expecting some strong winds there over the next couple of hours and some isolated moderate to heavy showers here and there. This tropical cyclone is dragging further north than initially expected, and we're also expecting for it to head far north of, much further north of Gatton and Toowoomba than we were initially expecting a couple of days ago. In fact, it's going to pass north of the Wivenhoe Dam area and up towards Yarraman and Moore, and in fact, the tropical cyclone could get as far north as Kingaroy as well, or at least its remnant energy in the low pressure system could get as far north as Kingaroy. Now, that's a lot further north than what we were expecting yesterday, and as such, it's dragging in this moisture outside of the Gold Coast hinterland, now up in towards the Brisbane area, and that means that the rainfall accumulations across the Brisbane area are going to be comparative to what we were expecting a couple of days ago around the Gold Coast hinterland and into the northeast of New South Wales. So just before we go fully into this forecast here, I want those in northeast New South Wales and southeast Queensland to understand that whilst the worst of the tropical cyclone has passed, there is still some substantial rainfall accumulations expected, especially for the southeast corners of Queensland into the Mount Tamborine area and the Gold Coast hinterland area. On top of the 300 millimeters that has fallen over the last 24 hours, a further 150 to 200 millimeters is possible, but those massive massive rainfall accumulations have now shifted north of your area and are expected to be impacting the areas around the Ivanhoe Dam. So let's jump into the forecast right now and see what is expected. So again, the forecast model is not really calling for too much in the way of rainfall to be occurring right now. There are some heavier showers developing on the forecast models though, and you can see throughout the remainder of today, we're expecting a very heavy band of rainfall to develop along the southern flank of this low pressure system as it moves further inland, which will drag in a lot of tropical moisture in from the southern parts of the Coral Sea offshore from the Sunshine Coast, and this tropical moisture will head into the coastline at about 4 or 5 o'clock later on this afternoon into the Moreton Bay area before colliding with the coastline at about 6 o'clock, and then heading further inland, very slow moving throughout the remainder of tonight, and then through tonight into early tomorrow morning. We're expecting constant deluges throughout the northern suburbs of Brisbane and into the mountains surrounding the Ivanhoe Dam area. Now, I'll get to the rainfall accumulations in just a moment and what's expected in terms of flooding, but we're looking at rainfall rates here over the next 24 hours, averaging between 10 and 15 millimetres an hour, with peak rainfall rates tonight into early tomorrow morning. In fact, out towards late tomorrow morning, they could be approaching 50 to 60 millimetres an hour, sustained for up to 12 hours at a time. So some really big rainfall accumulations can be expected, which could give way to 12-hourly rainfall accumulations being widespread around that 250 to 400 millimetre mark, with isolated 24-hourly accumulations up to 600 millimetres outside of the Ivanhoe Dam area. And whilst this isn't record-breaking rainfall, it is very close to it and certainly cause for concern for those in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, and especially out towards some of the foothills towards the northwest of Brisbane as well. So north of Ipswich, outside of Esk and Lowood as well. And contrasting this with other forecast models as well, especially the convective forecast models, which are doing a very good job with this storm so far. You can see plenty of rainfall streaming through the Brisbane metro area as well, in from Redland City through Brisbane, then out towards Logan City and Ipswich as well, with the heaviest falls expected later on tonight into very early tomorrow morning outside of Ipswich towards the north up towards the Ivanhoe Dam area, and then along the Sunshine Coast with a very heavy band of rainfall developing by early tomorrow morning and towards late tomorrow morning, which is just going to swamp the mountains adjacent to the Sunshine Coast and then out towards the northwest of Brisbane. And I mean, these rainfall rates are going to be extreme there. I mean, we're already seeing these rainfall accumulations here up to about 70 or 80 millimetres an hour, with higher accumulations expected further north into the Sunshine Coast. And whilst they won't be as long-lived up into the Sunshine Coast, we'll still be seeing 3-hourly rainfall accumulations up here, potentially as high as 200 millimetres as we get in towards later tomorrow morning. So some extreme rainfall accumulations look to be expected as a result of this tropical cyclone. So it's all of the tropical moisture, and what's going to be happening here, we'll refer back to the radar imagery as this center of the storm here, this pinwheel, which is a tropical cyclone's remnant of the eye, as it heads further inland out towards Kingaroy, it's going to drag this swathe of moisture here closer to the coastline. And once that rainfall band gets itself jammed up against the mountains adjacent to the Sunshine Coast, the mountains there are just going to force these clouds uphill and as such wring the clouds dry in a phenomenon that's very common across southeast Queensland, where those mountains pick up far more rainfall than the coastline areas, and that's exactly what's going to happen here. You can think of the mountains being a very strong hand just wringing a towel dry, and that towel being the clouds here with lots of latent moisture in them, and as such plenty of extreme rainfall accumulations expected out towards the north and the northwest of Brisbane. Again, back to the forecast models, you can see the heaviest falls will be occurring throughout tomorrow morning from about midnight onwards out to about 9 a.m. in the morning. The rainfall accumulations will continue through early tomorrow morning as well, and in towards late tomorrow morning we'll also see them developing in the afternoon once again. Plenty of thunderstorms also expected out well northwest of Brisbane out towards Edderswold and Taroom, those sort of areas in the thunderstorm alley area of Queensland, and that the rainfall should be clearing out by late tomorrow afternoon. And between the other major forecast models, it does look like the rainfall will begin to ease off a little bit late into tomorrow afternoon, then into early tomorrow evening, and then by Monday the majority of this rainfall and showery stuff will be very much easing off and on its way out. Still a couple of showers here and there through Monday as suggested by the forecast models, but it looks like it will be dry conditions returning across southeast Queensland on Tuesday. It's just some really heavy rainfall that's still to come on the backside of ex-tropical Cyclone Alfred. And I need to stress this as well because a lot of people are very complacent right now, and I'm seeing it in nearly every comment on the channel, and I don't want to be berating my viewers, of course, because my viewers they mean the world to me, but guys, the worst is not over at this point, and you need to remain very calm and very collected in this tropical cyclone, but also very aware that there is still a lot of rainfall to come on the backside of this system, and you can see it on the radar imagery right now. Even though if we play through a loop of this rainfall here, it looks like it's sliding down towards the south. Because of the tropical cyclone's motion, it's being dragged along with it, and as such the rainfall will be very shortly along the southeast Queensland coastline. Still some heavy showers moving through the Brisbane metro area as well. I'm sure you're feeling it right now with some gusty winds accompanying it, but for those on Moreton Island and North Stradbroke Island, that's the kind of stuff that we're expecting across the northwest of Brisbane over the next couple of hours and in towards tomorrow morning. Plenty more rainfall to come, that's for sure, and I need people to be absolutely switched on to this rainfall that's going to be coming through, because again, it is going to be the worst impact from this tropical cyclone. Even though those winds haven't been extreme, and a lot of people suggesting that this tropical cyclone has been a massive fizzer, which in terms of wind speeds, especially for some of the outer suburbs of Brisbane, it certainly has been a bit of a fizzer, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean that the damaging conditions are still over, and that also doesn't take away from the people down on the Gold Coast and into the northeast of New South Wales that have suffered through some of the windiest conditions on record down there, with record-breaking wind gusts and some extensive damage to homes and property and trees as well down in the southeast of Queensland overnight as a result of Tropical Cyclone Alfred's Category 2 strength landfall. So again, the worst is not over with this tropical cyclone, and I need people to remain very aware and very, very vigilant of that fact. So let's switch things over now and take a look at those rainfall accumulations and get an idea of the exact numbers that are expected over the next 24 to 36 hours. Once again, I do believe that the Access forecast model absolutely nails it their best, or does the best forecast here over the next couple of days. So we're talking about rainfall accumulations, which is the total amount of rainfall expected over the selected time period, which for this forecast here is the next 3 days. But keep in mind, the majority of this rainfall will be coming through in the first 12 hours of Sunday across this part of Queensland. And I do reckon that the Access has painted a very good picture in terms of exactly what rainfall accumulations can be expected, give or take a few little areas that could be refined a little bit more. So I'll give my hot take on what's expected as well across these areas. Starting in the north and heading south, as you know, on the Sunshine Coast, expecting some good rainfall along the coastline and into the mountains adjacent to the coastline as well. So outside of Gympie and Noosa, we're expecting rainfall accumulations between 50 and 150 millimetres. Peak falls will then begin to head further south of Gympie by the looks of things. Gympie can only expect about 75 millimetres by the looks of things. South of Noosa, outside of Mooloolaba and Maroochydore, rainfall accumulations will be approaching 300 millimetres over the next 3 days, with plenty of heavy falls expected inland, out towards Flaxton and Kellamsworth as well, and then north of Crowhamhurst, some really significant falls expected out there into some of the rivers that are going to feed through these areas. Some really significant rainfall can be expected through here, and this is just outside of Caloundra as well, which in itself can expect at least 250 millimetres. Bribie Island and expected somewhere between 250 and 400 millimetres of rainfall, probably closer to the 400 millimetre mark on the southern tips of Bribie Island, where the population is. Outside of Caboolture as well, especially further in and out towards Mount Mee, outside of the or just outside of the metro area or the town centre of Caboolture as well. Plenty of rainfall expected out there. Redcliffe can also see up to about 500 millimetres, same deal with Caboolture as well. And then out towards the Wivenhoe Dam and the mountains that are going to feed into the Wivenhoe Dam, some really concerning rainfall numbers are looking to materialise, at least on this forecast, with rainfall accumulations expected to be up to 800 millimetres there over the next 3 days. Like I said, the majority of that piping up from tonight and continuing through Sunday and easing off by Monday morning. So we're effectively looking at 500 to 600 millimetre 24-hourly accumulations outside of the Wivenhoe Dam, with a little bit of rainfall on either side of the peak 24-hourly accumulations there. So feeding into the Brisbane and the Bremer River, some really significant rainfall accumulations can be expected, and we'll get to that in just a second. And even out towards Kilcoy and Esk, some significant rainfall accumulations possible there, with about 300 millimetres coming through a piece for those locations. Toowoomba could see anywhere up to 200 millimetres. It's still a little bit of a wild card in terms of how much rainfall can be expected for the Toowoomba area, but I imagine the foothills over towards the eastern side of the town will be picking up the bulk of the rainfall, and then out towards the western side of the town it will be slightly drier out there. Gatton could see up to about 400 millimetres of rainfall, and then out towards Marburg and Ipswich up to about 400 millimetres of rainfall as well expected in those areas. Into the Brisbane area, especially into the northern suburbs around Redcliffe, the harbour and the airport, expecting rainfall accumulations there up to about 500 millimetres, with a peak rainfall of course being out towards the northwestern side of the town site through here outside of Strathpine and up towards Lake Sampson Vale. Some significant rainfall accumulations can be expected there through the North Pine River and then down into the Pine River as well, where we have overlooked the flooding risk for the Pine River, and certainly some very significant flooding can be expected of the Pine River, and I feel like that goes without saying. Now, if you do live in a flood-prone area along the Pine River, which thankfully doesn't encompass too many people because it is slightly elevated where they have built around the Pine River, but you still can expect some really significant flooding as a result of this tropical cyclone into the low-lying areas in the marshes outside of Brighton. However, Brighton for the most part should be fine from this rainfall that's going to be coming through. Whilst it will be very heavy, it's not expected to cause some really significant flooding out towards the Bramble Bay sort of area, but Strathpine expecting some extensive rainfall north of Brisbane. The Brisbane metro area, like I said, about 400 to 500 millimetres coming through there, so again the worst of the rainfall is still to come, and that will be on top of the 150 millimetres or so that they have already seen from Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Have I mentioned Ipswich? I believe I have, but again for Ipswich about 500 millimetres of rainfall coming through in those areas areas as well, especially further north up towards the Brisbane River on some of the foothills north of Ipswich as well. Some really significant rainfall accumulations can be expected, up to about 700 millimetres through there, flowing straight in towards the Brisbane River. The Bremer River as well is a significant cause for concern, especially as it flows down from some of the mountains south around the Boona area, which are expecting some significant falls as well outside of Warwick. Rainfall accumulations there could be up to about 300 or 400 millimetres coming through from a very quick period of time on Sunday morning, which will just flow straight into the Bremer River and will likely cause some flooding in the Ipswich area. Again, I will get to the flooding in a later part of this forecast update, I assure you guys that. Out towards Redland City as well, rainfall accumulations up to about 300 to 400 millimetres can be expected on top of the falls that have already fallen there. About 200 millimetres has already fallen, which will lead to cyclone accumulations, or the rainfall accumulations from this tropical cyclone, up to about 500 millimetres there. The rainfall doesn't really matter for north or south Stradbroke Island, with a couple of hundred millimetres expected on a piece there, down towards the Gold Coast, and then further south down towards Tweed Heads and into the Springbrook National Park. Rainfall accumulations not going to be above 100 millimetres by the looks of things for the coastal areas, and about 250 millimetres looks to be the maximum for the mountainous areas on top of the rainfall that has already fallen. But again, already major flooding flowing through the Murray-Wollumba area and into the Tweed River as a result of the rainfall that has already fallen. We've seen rainfall accumulations over the past 48 hours approaching 600 millimetres into some of these areas here, so a further 100 millimetres will still cause some significant woes and will effectively be another deluge that will just add to those river levels, which are already just crying out for help right now and really suffering those rivers down in the northeast corner of New South Wales. Apart from that, no, nothing too crazy in the way of serious rainfall expected. In fact, the majority of the rainfall already now streaming through the northeast of New South Wales. Outside of Coffs Harbour and Grafton, historically very wet places in an event like this when we get tropical weather events happen around the Brisbane area, expecting some really significant rainfall accumulations there as well. And this is certainly another area that has been overlooked, but accumulations outside of Coffs Harbour, north of Illawarra and Dorrigo, rainfall accumulations there could be up to 500 millimetres over the next 48 hours. Rainfall there should ease off through Sunday night into early Monday morning though, and some significant rainfall accumulations also possible, but not too likely at this point, between Moree down towards Narrabri and then as far south as Tamworth, and even further south down towards the Barrington Tops, as well as the remnant energy of Tropical Cyclone Alfred moves through these areas. And I estimate anywhere between 50 and 150 millimetres can be possible for these areas over the next couple of days, especially through Sunday night into Monday morning, as Tropical Cyclone Alfred's remnant energy and thunderstorms build in these areas. But again, don't get your hopes up for rainfall. It will be very hit and miss in these locations. Let's talk flooding now. I believe we've got all the numbers out for these locations across southeast Queensland, but especially for the Brisbane and the Bremer rivers now, some significant flooding is possible. Major flooding expected upstream of the Brisbane River through Sunday night into Monday morning. Moderate flooding expected in the Bremer River as well by Sunday afternoon and into Sunday evening. The chance of major flooding will also unfold there for the Bremer River. Significant flooding also expected through the Logan River as well, flowing through Logan City. We could be seeing moderate flood levels approach there, and some significant flooding also possible in the Coomera River and the Nerang River, with minor flooding possible in both rivers throughout the high tide of this afternoon. Significant flooding will also still continue across the northeast of New South Wales, with water levels expected to peak later on this afternoon, and we're expecting moderate to major flooding as well outside of Coffs Harbour and Grafton, especially through the Clarence River, which flows through Grafton. No, it is the Clarence River rather. I can't believe I got that right. And then the Richmond River flowing a little bit further north than that, expecting some major flooding through those locations possible as a result of this rainfall, especially if they get close to that 500 millimetre rainfall accumulations outside of Coffs Harbour, and some significant falls also expected further north. So plenty of the creeks up around the Glen Innes area and Tenterfield could also be seeing some really significant flooding as well as a result of the rainfall streaming ashore from Tropical Cyclone Alfred's remnant energy. Flooding will also continue up the Sunshine Coast as well, especially from deluges expected much later on tonight into early tomorrow morning. The Maroochy River as well, flowing through Maroochydore and the Sunshine Coast city area. Plenty of rainfall in those areas will likely lead to major flooding in these areas as well, especially some major flash flooding. If major riverine flooding doesn't develop, we'll still be seeing some major flash flooding, which could cause some extensive damage as well. And then further north up towards Noosa as well, I believe it's the Noosa River that flows through here. Yeah, the Noosa River, some significant flooding also expected and possible in those areas as well. And flooding through the Gympie area as well down in the Mary River, we could be seeing some significant rainfall flowing through the Mary River, which then I believe exits out around the Harvey Bay area. Yes, so some significant flooding also possible up around the Maryborough area as we push later on in the forecast period out towards Monday and Tuesday. Up there, it'll take the water levels a little bit of time to reach down through Tiara and then down towards the Maryborough area. We could still be seeing some moderate flooding in those areas as well, especially as the water levels start to pick up through Sunday and in towards Monday morning. So a lot of widespread flooding can be expected across the southeast corner of Queensland and even through the Sunshine Coast as well. And I recap, the rainfall will will be at its most intense through Sunday morning, so there'll be a very significant risk of flash flooding as well. There is a severe weather warning current, and I believe it is for rainfall accumulations over the 6-hour period up to about 200 millimeters, but to be honest, I think we could be seeing peak 3-hourly accumulations through Sunday morning, especially at around 3 or 4 o'clock local time in the morning. We could be seeing peak 3-hourly accumulations up to about 200 millimeters, so some really intense rainfall can be expected from this tropical cyclone, and I highlight that with some of the outer bands of this tropical cyclone here. I mean, there's a thick splodge of rainfall here, very slow moving, that's averaging between 30 up to about 70 or even 80 millimeters an hour in the core of the tropical cyclone. This rainfall here is also very heavy, and the radar imagery is really struggling to pick up on it because it is protected by these thunderstorms. But mark my words, there's some very heavy falls out here, and this tropical cyclone's remnant energy is certainly making the most of those warm sea temperatures that still remain after this tropical cyclone has passed through, and there's going to be plenty more moisture streaming into the southeast corner of Queensland over the next couple of hours and into the next couple of days as well. So I repeat, the worst is yet to come, especially in terms of the flooding risks for the Brisbane metro area. It's really thankful that they haven't had too much in the way of significant impacts, especially on the wind side of things around the Brisbane city area, especially as you get further inland. The coastal areas have suffered a little bit from extensive damage as a result of Tropical Cyclone Alfred's Category 2 passage between North Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island, but in terms of wind damage, it could have been a lot worse around the Brisbane city area. The Gold Coast certainly took the brunt of this tropical cyclone, and Brisbane certainly dodged a bullet, that's for sure. Significant rainfall, however, is certainly going to be the main threat, and like I said, major flooding can be expected of both the Brisbane and the Bremer rivers, and I believe that people need to be acting now to remain safe. In terms of the preparations that you should be making, if you have access to sandbags on your property, then I strongly advise you use them to protect your property throughout the next couple of hours. There will be breaks in the weather here and there until much later on tonight, so you do still have the remainder of today to, I guess, quote-unquote, prepare for the flooding event that is going to unfold if you haven't taken the necessary precautions already. But my strongest advice right now would be to get out of your location if you live in a flood-prone area, or you feel unsafe, or you feel like you are at a significant risk of flooding. My strongest advice right now would be to get inland towards friends and family, out towards the Toowoomba area, even in towards the Brisbane city area if you've got friends and family there that are going to be safe from the flooding risk, especially if they're far away from rivers or bodies of water. I'd strongly recommend you get yourself through there, especially if you do live in a flood-prone area. But to be honest, I think it is just a little bit too late and a bit too dangerous as well. The rainfall is very heavy and those winds are still quite strong. Wind gusts are still approaching 50 kilometers an hour through parts of the Brisbane city area. So again, don't underestimate the power of this tropical cyclone. Even though it is substantially weaker this morning, we've still got some strong winds as a result. And Tropical Cyclone Alfred certainly still far from done. I mean, you can see gale force winds still occurring around the Gold Coast Seaway area and near gale force winds up around the Cape Morton Lighthouse, so the conditions are still far from easing off properly. But yeah, if you do have time to prepare your home and property with sandbags, if you've got them at easy access on your property or just down the road, then I strongly advise you doing that throughout the remainder of today. Last minute preparations are much better than no preparations, that's for sure, but at this point it's definitely still time to hunker down and stay hunkered down from this tropical cyclone. Even though the cyclone warnings have since been lifted, you're still under a severe weather warning, which, to be honest, probably carries the same amount of weight or even more weight, especially if you head further inland out towards some of those mountainous areas. Anyways, that is all that I have time for today. Thank you so much for all the support in the videos recently. It has been much appreciated, and again, I could not thank these people enough. All the people lately that have been watching and enjoying the content, I cannot thank any of you enough, and the support has been heartwarming to see. So again, thank you to all of those that have donated and all the kind words that I'm seeing in the comment section down below, and to all of the new subscribers as well and the followers over on the Facebook page. It has been much appreciated. Anyways, that is all that I have time for today, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.